What you touched upon there, that to be able to sit in discomfort in your asana practice is an amazing pathway into being able to sit with your thoughts in meditation. Welcome to the Yoga Lens podcast with Moni and Emily from Vim Yoga Academy. Here we explore life through a yogic lens, from teaching and philosophy to everyday life, mindsets, and all the messiness in between. This is yoga on and off the mat and in motion.
Hi, and welcome back to the Yoga Lens podcast. I'm Moni, and I'm here with Emily from Vim Yoga Academy. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
Hi.
So today you have something to discuss with us. We like to bring in some different topics. We often come up with these just as from our daily practice of practicing yoga both on and off the mat. And when you have this sort of approach to life, things tend to come up, thoughts that can be brought up for discussion. So what do you have for us today, Moni?
So I want to dig a little bit deeper into one of the niyamas, Santosha. And one of the reasons I want to do this is because I've always had this question when it comes to the yogic practice and in terms of how people see us, and we spoke a little bit about this last week, about how when you're practicing yoga, there's kind of this frame that people put around you in terms of how you should respond and how you should be in daily life. And there's this perception that because you're practicing yoga, that you should always be in this space or in this feeling or in this attitude and behavior of contentment, happiness, positivity. This hasn't been my experience. And sometimes I've really had to question myself in terms of what my practice is and what I'm trying to achieve through my practice. And a few years ago, I came up a lot with this idea of discomfort and also regression. So a few years ago, I broke my wrist. That brought up a lot of issues and pains, and my practice itself had to adapt. And I had to adapt myself, and my attitude to myself and my practice had to change. And I was in a lot of discomfort, both physically, physiologically, but also where that took me in terms of my practice off the mat, in terms of my expectations of myself, the hardships that I was going through in terms of what I had to do to rehabilitate myself. And so I really dug into this idea of discomfort of not growing in the direction that I thought I was growing in. And so I really started to think about this idea of growth and what it was to grow. And what I came to realize is when we dig into the niyamas and the yamas, is that when we put all these things together, like Santosha, for example, this idea of contentment and gratitude, is that we need to see growth in all directions. It's not linear. It doesn't just go in one direction. And that growth is in 2 directions, 3 directions, 100 directions. It goes in many directions all the time. For me, I started to create this spectrum in terms of what was comfortable and what was uncomfortable. And then since I've kind of laid it out so that I've got this clear framework to work with, I've kind of seen myself on this spectrum, kind of ebbing and flowing towards comfort and discomfort all the time, and realizing that this idea of contentment and gratitude that is spoken about within the niyamas is that it's not necessarily about the attitude of contentment and being content, but this idea of acceptance of where we are, exactly where we are in the current state and in the current moment. So this has been a really big part of my practice, not only on the mat, but off the mat as well. Can you relate to that in any way?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a very good framework for beginning to think that growth is, as you say, it's not linear and it's in all directions, but it's not just from positive things, because I think we tend to think a lot that growth is always from something positive. I become better at something. And when things like this happen, when you injure yourself and you are so set on that your growth comes from, for example, your physical practice, or you become a better person, I find a lot of calm in meditation, or I can find a lot more like Zen at work and all of that. It's very easy to think that it's all going to be something positive. And you forget that in most cases, when you learn something, it comes like equally from something that isn't positive. It comes from a negative experience. In business, we always talk about how you should fail forward. Right? And
right.
you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. But that is always hard to forget when you are in the middle of that, when you are in the middle of having an injury or in the middle of finding yourself feeling down, feeling depressed. You always just want to lean into like, why do I not feel good? Why can I not grow my practice this way? But it's actually, the learning can be in being exactly where you are. And I think that is so much about what Santosha is. It's about that figuring out that you need to grow wherever you are in that specific moment. And that there is growth in anything.
Right.
In everything that you experience, there is something to learn and there is growth, but it's not always obvious.
Right. And I think when we start to realize this is that we can actually give ourselves less pain and less suffering, right? Because if we're always kind of driving behind this idea that we have to be happy, we have to be positive, that we're always in comfort, that that's where we need to be, if we're always driving behind that, that in itself can actually cause suffering, right? That can actually cause the discomfort because we're never fully always there. There are moments when we're there, and it's to be content and grateful for those moments, but also to use that as self-study. So when I go back to this idea of this spectrum of comfort and discomfort, or things that we like or dislike, and in some of the transcripts that talk about Santosha, talk about this idea of likes and dislikes. If we're always trying to drive towards this idea of going towards what we like, what we're comfortable with, what makes us happy, without really asking the question, why? What part of myself really likes that? What part of myself is driven to be joyous around that? Or I feel really happy when I do that. If we don't dig into it, then we really don't know where it is that we need to grow for those places that when we do feel this dissatisfaction, how we attend to that. So, for example, if I'm going towards something that I really like, that's not always a given. That's always going to change. We can't always say that that's going to be the case all the time. And so when I drive towards something that I like, I really need to ask myself, in what part of myself is engaged in that? And then I can see what part of myself isn't engaged in that. And perhaps that's where I can move myself into a practice or a questioning in terms of what parts of myself I need to attend to grow into perhaps more comfort, or to grow in towards something that feels more satisfactory.
Yeah, I agree. But I'm curious if you could share more of how you do it, because it's a very valuable point and insight, but maybe not clear for everyone. How do you do it technically? Do you pause? Do you take a breath? Or do you listen into where it feels in your body? Do you have any tips on how to, when you find yourself being in that state of, okay, I am really liking this, but I want to analyze. For the first insight is, of course, to actually, in that moment, being able to pause and stop, and having the awareness enough to pause and begin the analysis. But then, do you have any good tips on how you could actually form this analysis?
All right. So I think there's two parts of this that I really want to explore. So there is the practice of questioning, why is it really, what is it that I'm really enjoying about this? And I always come back when I'm teaching and on the mat, when I ask my students perhaps to come going towards a peak pose and they've achieved it, come back to sit and to feel into the sensation of it, to feel where that resonates in the body. Because anything to do with a feeling or an emotion is a sensation. And so to actually physically go back into the body and connect with the sensation of it, and that takes out the judgment of it. It takes out this framework of that's good, that's happy, that's whatever. It comes back into a physiological learning, right? Or a kinesthetic kind of learning.
Yeah. So first is actually just getting the physical sensation.
Getting the physical sensation. And then you can start to think about attachments in terms of how you think about it. Maybe then you start to dig into thoughts that then come up, images that come up, and actually just really observe, like take the time to pause and, as you said, become really aware of exactly what's going on.
Yeah, and I think this could be related back to what we spoke about last time about your core beliefs, because this is a typical place where I would ask myself, is this related to something in my past, or is it really, really deep? Is it like an instinct that it's related to? Is it really embedded in my core beliefs? Or is it something that is created just now by myself, just as a way to try to figure out what's like the core beliefs and what is me, all of these layers to make it more clear what I actually like about something.
Yeah, absolutely. So then there's the flip side, right? So then there's when something is really uncomfortable, when there's a pain or there's a suffering, or you're going into something that you really don't like. When we think about this idea of dislikes and discomfort, that shows up in the physiology of the body as well. So that becomes a sensation. What I wouldn't recommend is to, rather than bypass that because it feels uncomfortable, because it feels like there's a suffering and a dislike towards that, rather than attend to it, to lay over the top a positive affirmation without digging deep first, or a breath, breathe it away, or to just say, let it go, without first really actually feeling what's going on. We've spoken about it before off the mic, off the podcast, is this idea of spiritual bypassing, which is to kind of, rather than accept and really dig into what's really going on, is to have this ideal of what a spiritual practice looks like or feels like or acts like, and going towards this idea of just let it go, be in this positive state, in this positive space all the time, without actually really digging into what's actually there and what's going on.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. And just as an example, this made me think about backbends, for example, how you could be really uncomfortable in backbends, and it is not related to how backbendy or how flexible you are. It can actually be related to the fact that you are opening up your heart space, that you're really flaring your most vulnerable parts to the world, and that it's so deep within us that this is dangerous. You're like not covering yourself up. Maybe your arms are behind you and you cannot quickly protect yourself in your heart and your abdomen and your soft parts. And maybe that is the reason you feel uncomfortable in backbends. It can be very, very deep, like an ancient feeling that is not related to how backbendy you are. And the same for Shavasana, like the nicest, the best pose in the world. And people can be so uncomfortable. And that might be related to that you're not feeling safe. In general, there is a feeling of non-safety and security in your life, that you are in a space personally where you find that you don't really feel safe. Maybe you're not financially safe. Maybe you feel unsafe in a relationship. Maybe something has happened. And that is the reason that you feel that it's super uncomfortable and almost scary to lie down in that also very vulnerable position that Shavasana is, and relax. And that's why you begin to fiddle with things or squirm around and like blink and open up your eyes and look around the room to what everybody else is doing.
Right. And I hear a lot of people saying about meditation practice, why they avoid meditation practice for that very reason, is that sitting silent, observing oneself is for some people an absolute nightmare to even consider. And so there's this pushing away. But what I feel is that, and what I've witnessed, what I've experienced in terms of my own growth, what I've experienced in terms of my students' growth over all of these years, is that actually going more towards those dislikes that is where the juice is. That is where we can really harness growth, right? We can really start to dig into what is the pain? What is the suffering? Is it a fear? Is it my incapability? Is there a physiological capability? Have I not trained myself to the point where I want to be? I've got an idea of myself, but I haven't actually got there through my training. And so there's a dislike or a discomfort that shows up because I'm not actually the idea of myself that I think I am. And so therefore, there's an opportunity for growth there. Okay, what do I need to do to address that if it's something physiological or physical? If it's a doubt or it's a fear, then what is that fear? What am I bringing into my practice? Why am I fearful? Why is that showing up in my life? And being able to really dig into that and harness that and use that for growth rather than stuffing it away and pretending that it's not happening and layering in this kind of false positivity on top, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so for these people, I also get a lot of that it's very difficult to meditate. What would you say could be a first step? Because I can still think that even if we're trying to say it very clearly, to like sit with it and to move towards the discomfort, it might not be completely clear and it might not be practical enough advice for somebody who, as soon as that feeling comes in and that situation appears when they meditate, they get up and they move around and they begin doing something else. So what could be a good start? The first thing to do when you begin to meditate, doing very short sessions, of course, but is there anything else that you, just in the realm of moving towards the discomfort?
The way I would frame this is to link, for example, we're talking about yoga on the mat and off the mat. And so I would come back first to the practice of asana. And when we're practicing asana, sensations are coming up all the time. And there's going to be physical sensations in terms of great sensations, opening a shoulder or opening the heart center. But sometimes moving into the hips, there's going to be some pain. So rather than quickly, and I'm not talking about sharp, nasty pain, I'm talking, radiating pain, especially if you're in a yin practice or in a power flow where there's some intensity behind the practice in terms of either the length that you're holding it or the amount of repetitions that you're doing. When there's this discomfort that comes up, rather than being reactive to that and pulling yourself out and saying, oh, I can't do it, and stopping and going into child's pose immediately, is to actually catch yourself in the moment and catch yourself in the awareness of the discomfort and stay with the sensation of it. And again, coming back to this sensation and the awareness of the sensation, rather than just quickly reacting and turning the other way, how can you slow down your thoughts, slow down your reactions, and just observe what's actually happening there in the body at that moment? And so then we could take that into a meditation practice. Meditating, you might find yourself in a moment of bliss, and then suddenly something happens, an image comes to mind, your heart starts racing, you feel uncomfortable, you feel you need to escape that moment. So rather than opening the eyes and getting up and walking away, is actually going back to what was the discomfort. There was an image that came into my head and my heart started racing. Okay, so my heart is racing. How fast is it racing? Oh, I'm noticing it's really, I can feel the sensation of my heart beating in my chest. So actually going in and observing the physiology of it and taking the time not just to react, to slow down and just be and observe what's actually going on. And so, for example, it might even be putting your hand on your chest rather than getting up and walking away, taking another action, hand on chest, really feeling the heart underneath the hand and feeling that discomfort that feels like a feeling and an emotion that you want to escape is actually a sensation that if you dig into that, the more you observe the sensation itself, it changes and it grows into something else. And it might grow into further discomfort for a little bit, but if you hang with it, it disperses and becomes something else. And then you can actually ask, where do I feel that? Is it in my chest? And when it starts to disperse, oh, actually, I feel it a little bit in my belly as well, so you start to just very slowly observe and just stay there silently, or it doesn't feel silent in the head, but not reacting and doing a big, eject out of the situation.
And also maybe the most common thing to do if it's mainly your thoughts, because that's one experience that people have, that they feel that they just have too many thoughts when they start to meditate. It's like a chaos in the head. And then we often recommend physical attachment, like you attach it to something physical like the breath. Maybe you have some soft music that you can focus your attention on, just having that something outside to focus on that is rhythmic, that is constant, so that you can maybe begin to not think about too much of those thoughts and let them just come in and let them pass, because that is really what we want to in meditation. Just having that physical thing to think about is a good idea, because I think a lot of the stuff that is happening in meditation is also that too many things are coming in, and also people begin to think that they are failing. That they're failing at meditation because they think that your head should be completely empty. There should be nothing going on. You're supposed to be in this high Zen state, and instead they're experiencing more thoughts than ever. Your thoughts are just hopping around, touching everything from your daily life to your childhood. Then it begins to feel like a failure, and then you get up and you like, oh, I can't do this. This is not for me.
Yeah. And so this just brings me back to this idea of growth, because I think we all have this idea that when we're suffering, when we're in pain, when we're doing something and we dislike it, that we're failing somehow. Suffering, pain, dislikes, going into discomfort, that's the human condition. That is humanness. That's so much a part of us, just as much as joy and comfort. If you think about how we're born into the world, it's through excruciating pain on both sides, perhaps. But the human condition itself is painful. The way we grow is painful, and suffering can produce the biggest amount of growth. And so when we're not necessarily in this state of happiness and joy, and life doesn't seem to be in this consistent mode of comfort, not to beat ourselves up about it, but actually to harness and really reframe what it means to suffer, and to reframe what it is to be in pain, and to choose that as a direction, to actually choose to go into the discomfort. So for example, I practice yoga every day, asana most days, but if I'm not practicing asana, then I'm a meditation practice or a writing practice, but I practice yoga every day. And my asana practice, there are some days I really do not want to get on that mat. I have so much resistance. Something has happened. I've woken up. I could even go to sleep the night before full of enthusiasm and wake up the next morning and really not want to go to my mat. But I choose to go anyway, and I choose to go towards the discomfort of not wanting to show up. And when I do that, then what I've often found is that the moments when I'm in the most resistance to practicing are actually some of my best practices, because I have this question. I'm always asking myself, well, why is it today I don't want to practice? What part of the practice don't I want to move towards? And is that a symptom of something deeper that's going on? And I can attend to that either in my practice as I'm working and moving, or I attend to it in a meditation or in a journaling or whatnot. And so if I only practice when I only really want to practice, perhaps I wouldn't be practicing all the time. And then my asana practice isn't going to grow the way that I grow my physical self, my idea of where I want to go.
Do you think people find it easier to sit with physical discomfort than mental discomfort now, today?
That's really interesting.
I know.
It's such a big question, because, this idea at the moment, and I think it's in education. So, for example, everyone's the winner. You participate, so you're a winner. From what I hear and from my friends and colleagues in America, it's very American to, you know, level out the playing field. So even the person who won that physical running race, the last person also gets the same prize. Everyone gets the same prize because they've participated. I don't really want to go into whether I agree with that or not, but I question the idea of why do we do that, in terms of, are we trying to create little beings and humans that can't deal with the discomfort of not coming first?
Yeah.
And then that starts to show up in everything. I don't want to be pushed on my mat. And I've been in many, many, many different situations, from working with, you know, Hollywood stars to the local person in the village. And this can show up. This can show up when you ask someone or push someone to do something, and their expectation is, I don't want to be pushed. I shouldn't feel any discomfort. And then they redirect that back to you. And then you have to redirect that back to them.
Yeah.
As a teacher, it's a really big question. How far do you push your students into a space of physical discomfort, which could produce psychological or thought patterns that are uncomfortable?
But I find it can also be the other way around, that people come from a space where they are used to pushing themselves physically. For example, they are used to work out pretty hard, or they go running and they run, and running is hard. Your lungs are in pain and your legs are in pain and it's hard to breathe, but people push through that. I mean, everybody runs, right? They can push through running, but people cannot stay in Shavasana because it's a mental discomfort. And it's so interesting. And I think it has a connection to the society where we always have stimulation. So you never really have to sit with yourself as it is today. I mean, when we were young, I was bored so many times. I was bored all the time because I had nothing to do. You felt that you had done everything. I have been drawing, I have been outside, I have called on my friends, I played with the cat, and now I'm bored and there are like 8 hours left of the day. And you went to your mom and like, I'm bored, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Tell me what to do. Nobody ever had to do that today. You can always be stimulated at any time of day. And that means that maybe we kind of no longer have the ability to be with ourselves in silence, and that makes it really uncomfortable for those times when we are forced to do that. And when, for example, when we try to meditate, that it's all of a sudden it becomes very clear that, okay, I have stuff inside of me that I never listened to, and now they're all trying to come out at once, and I just can't have it. I need to leave. It's easier to go running, or it's easier to push myself in the gym because it is a physical sensation. But I feel like what you touched upon there, that to be able to sit in discomfort in your asana practice is an amazing pathway into being able to sit with your thoughts in meditation. But you sort of have to make that clear for yourself. When you go into your asana practice, you actually think like, now when I feel discomfort, I will sit with it because it will help me to find a way to sit with myself in silence, whether that is in meditation or in the Shavasana at the end of class, but just to have that sort of plan forward. Yeah. Because otherwise you might go in and you sit with a discomfort, but you never make it that pathway. You never connect those two dots, that this sitting with this discomfort will help me to sit with this other discomfort. Right. So I think that maybe is a really good conclusion, particularly for that sort of situation, for anyone out listening that want to be able to sit in discomfort in their own head. That the asana practice is a great pathway, but you have to make yourself aware of it and have a clear intention.
Yeah, I think that's where we can grow as teachers. I think that's where we can start to frame those things, not just giving the Dharma talk at the beginning of a class, but also threading the philosophy through the class and bringing your students awareness to their discomfort, knowing that perhaps going into pigeon pose and staying there for a few minutes is really going to bring some discomfort up in the hip. And so then just using that and facilitating your students through that discomfort and starting to create those links into what that might link to in off the mat. and how they might then use that. For example, going back to this idea of boredom and being able to sit with oneself rather than quickly picking up the phone and going on Instagram is to really catch yourself at that moment. I'm bored. I feel like I need to react. I'm going for my phone. Stop, pause. Let's just sit with the boredom and see what part of myself is bored. What part of myself then is uncomfortable with that. And so, yeah, I think as teachers, that's where we can really do our amazing, beautiful work to really grow our students up, to really find how growth can go in all of those different directions.
Yeah, I think that is beautiful. And just as a side note, do you remember the times when you could go out, like you could be in a train station and you were sitting and watching people? I remember my mom, she could tell me, I love to go here to this city and sit on a bench and watch people.
Yes.
It's like nobody ever does that today, right?
No.
Like too few people do that today. I wish that more people would, because it might bring some more understanding towards other people and just more awareness of what other people are doing and how they look, and that we're all so different and we're all behaving differently.
Because we've all got this phone in front of our faces now that we're not looking out. We're not looking out and seeing what's going on and asking questions. Where do I go?
I know.
Which direction do I go? Which direction did you come from? You know, there's when I was studying Feldenkrais, and it's still one of my practices now as a Feldenkrais practitioner, is when you've got a client coming and they first walk in the door, you're trained to actually ask the questions, where do they think their hips are? Where are they walking from? And when you take that question into daily life, and so you just sit in a cafe and you just watch people walk and honestly see where you think their hips are, because you know there's this trend when the jeans were right down near their thighs. So some people are walking with their hips down in their thighs, and some people think that they're up in their shoulders. So it's interesting. Observing people is fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. It's a better activity than being on your phone, actually.
Absolutely.
Watch people.
Yeah, really. It's such a joy, such a pleasure. It's comical. Life is just really, it's right in front of us all the time. And we've been convinced, and the marketing companies have done a really good job to take us out of that everyday reality and put us in this box.
Yeah. It's really sad.
Yeah, let's put the phones down. Get on our mats and practice being uncomfortable with each other.
Yes, let's sit in discomfort with each other.
Okay, so thank you so much for joining me with this conversation, Emily.
Thank you.
It's gone in so many different directions.
It was very insightful and made me think about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I find it very interesting that we both have different perspectives and different clients.
Yeah.
I think it's nice.
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you for such a lovely conversation today.
Thank you. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Yes, we will.